Welcome to the Haven Collective. I'm J.R. Foresteros, and this is the Beacon Bit. Today we're talking about John chapter 4, verses 5 through 42. It's the encounter that Jesus has with the Samaritan woman. And just fair warning, this is one of my favorite texts in the whole Bible, and it is incredibly rich, and we're just going to barely get to scratch the surface. But it's going to be a good time. Buckle up, buttercups. Before we get into that, I just want to observe, and this is nothing new, but I'm taken by the obsession that Christians have with celebrity. I think it does come partly with the celebrity pastor stuff, but it's also the high profile conversions that we see. And this has been going on since I was a kid, but I'm thinking, in more recent days of the right-wing politician and podcaster and comedian Russell Brand, who converted to Christianity and within a week was baptizing people, or Kanye, when he put out his gospel album and then was doing the Sunday services everywhere, just kind of started his own mobile church, again, within weeks of having officially converted or whatever, right? And again, I think especially when I was younger, there was this sense of oh my gosh, these people, if they convert, they can make a difference. They can save the world because of their influence, because they have so much power. Because I think there was this idea that if people see that they believe, then it must give some credibility to the whole Jesus thing. Whereas no one's going to believe someone like a little old me or a little old you, or certainly no other people that we would consider even less influential or more on the margins of society, right? And yet we know, this is something we know is not right. We know this. We know that Jesus says the greatest will be last and the last will be the greatest, right? The first will be last, the last will be first. The greatest will be the least will be the greatest, all this kind of stuff. We know these things. But why? This is what I want to get into today, really. Why? Why is it that Jesus says it's actually the people who are wealthy, it's harder for them to come to the kingdom than a camel to go through the eye of a needle, right? Why is it that people who have so much power and privilege, why are they so far in the end from God's kingdom? Whereas it seems like those who are marginalized, those who are trod upon, they are so close, in Jesus's words. Why does he like them the best, right? I think this is an interesting question. And frankly, it's one that this particular story answers in a really profound way, particularly as it is paired with the story of Nicodemus that we explored last week. And they are right next to each other in John's gospel for a reason. So again, you've likely gone through this story before, especially if you've been around Haven for any length of time, because like I said, it's one of my favorites. But this woman that Jesus encounters, so again, to set the scene, they're in Samaria, which is sort of a no-go place for the Judeans. We'll just say they have a lot of racial tension between them. They don't like each other. They both think each other are the devil. And so it's a big deal that they're even in Samaria in the first place. So they come to this well outside of town. They're parked at the well. And this is a famous historical spot, by the way. It's where it's called Jacob's Well. And it's where Jacob met his wife, Rachel. Back in the OT, back in the it's one of the greatest hit rom-coms in the Jewish story. So Jesus is hanging out at the well, and he sends his disciples into town, and the Bible tells us they go to get food, right? Now, one of the things I love about this story is there's a lot of conversation about food and water, because they're at the well, right? And Jesus is never talking about actual food or actual water. He's always talking on a spiritual level. But both the disciples and this woman misunderstand him and think that he's talking about physical food and physical water. So if you read the story with that in mind, there's all of this weird, fun wordplay going on. It's what makes this a story that was meant to be told again and again and again, because the first time through it, you don't get any of that till the end. And then once you know that and you're reading through it, you're like, oh, I see what's going on here, right? So Jesus and the woman have this conversation about water, where she thinks that he's talking about water from the well, and he's actually talking about God's grace and being a part of his messianic movement. And she doesn't understand that. Then, of course, she does understand that. And we know that because when she returns to the village, she leaves her water jar. And Jesus had said, if you have the water that I'm giving you, the spiritual water, then you'll never be thirsty again. So it's this fun little, again, narrative clue there. But we have to imagine, if we zoom out, what's going on here. So Jesus and his disciples come to the well, right? And then Jesus stays there, and the disciples go to town, and they pass this woman as she's coming from the town to the well. They probably gave her a dirty look. They probably said some off-color jokes about her as she passed them. They probably weren't too subtle about it. You know, she's used to hearing this kind of stuff as the kind of woman that she is. And then she gets to the well. The disciples are in town buying food. The woman is at the well getting water, except she doesn't get the water. She gets the spiritual water. And then she leaves and runs back to the town. And as she's coming, we see the disciples coming back because they see Jesus talking to her and they're scandalized by this. So we know they can see this. They get back. It's awkward. No one wants to mention it to Jesus because he's Jesus, right? But finally they say, hey, Lord, we brought the food. And Jesus is like, I have food you don't know anything about. Because again, he's talking about spiritual food, right? He's talking about doing the work that God sent him here to do, which is to make all people into children of God, which he's just done with this woman. And so he's very full, right? He's very full of the Spirit. He's very full on the joy of the work that he's been doing. The disciples don't get this. And they're just like, did the woman give him food? Like, what's happening? Like, he sent us to get food. We brought the food. Why does he always do this weird stuff to us? So again, they passed each other the first time, both seeking food and water, physical food and water. The woman leaves with spiritual water, no physical water. The disciples return with physical food, not spiritual food. Jesus says, I've got spiritual food you don't know anything about. The disciples don't understand. They're upset. And Jesus says, look, even now the harvest is happening. And you can imagine him pointing back to the town because in the meantime, the woman has taken her spiritual water back to the town. And she said, you've got to come see this man who's told me everything I've ever done. I think he might be the Messiah. And again, she's not the most popular person in this town. So they're like, everything you've ever done, that must have taken a while. Sure, we'll come. And so she comes back leading the entire town with her. And you have to imagine that the disciples might be in this moment going, oh, I don't think he meant for us to get literal bread. Like it's starting to click for them, right? Jesus sent them into town to do the work that he was about. He sent them to do the very thing that the woman has done. And so when everything is said and done in this story, the woman, this outcast, poor, uneducated, immoral Samaritan woman who is at the bottom of the bottom, proves to be a more faithful disciple who understands who Jesus is and what he is about better than all of the Jewish men who are in his entourage. And she proves that not by winning a theological debate, but by actually doing the work that Jesus has commissioned all of us to do. She brings her entire town to meet him. And then it says he stayed there for several days. This is incredible. This is an incredible story, right? And again, we barely scratched the surface of all of the crazy symbolism that's going on here and all of the beauty that's in this text. But I want you to see what's going on, right? This woman who is an outcast, who is the worst of the worst, who, if you had someone in Jesus's day rank all of the people who show up in all four of the Gospels in terms of social prestige and esteem, she would be at the bottom of the list without question, probably even below the lepers that Jesus encountered, because at least they were Jews. Back when the Democrats and the Republicans were discussing a draconian new immigration bill, there was a New York Times columnist. His name was Thomas Friedman. And in Omar El-Akkad's book, One Day Everyone Will Always Have Been Against This, he observes that during this argument about this immigration bill, Friedman writes a piece comparing Iran, which is a nation of more than 87 million, to a wasp. Akkad says, what laces the entire racist nonsensical premise is fear. Everyone knows, instinctively, the recoil the sight of a wasp induces. But fear is no end in itself. The function here is to allow for the abdication of restraint. Nobody has ever been blamed for wanting to swat a wasp. It might have stung. This is what we do with people like the Samaritan woman. We reduce them to animals, to wasps, to things to be exterminated, because that gets us off the hook morally. We no longer see them as people. We see them as a danger, as something gross, as something infectious, as something that is poisonous or venomous, or something to be removed, eliminated, swatted, eradicated, exterminated, exorcised. And yet John gives us these two stories. Nicodemus, this incredibly powerful, wealthy, positioned man who, frankly, if Jesus had just been a little nicer to him and converted him to the movement, might have done wonders for Jesus' standing in Jerusalem. And on the other hand, we have this immoral, outcast, uneducated Samaritan woman who's not going to do Jesus any favors in the polls, who frankly is dangerous. Then when the disciples see Jesus talking to her, they immediately begin to worry about what this is going to do to his reputation. She's a wasp, something to be swatted. And yet it's not Nicodemus who gets Jesus' invitation. Nicodemus leaves the conversation with Jesus confused, unsure, befuddled at the possibility that he might have to start from scratch. The Samaritan woman, though, she's the one losing the board game. She hasn't had a successful turn her entire life. And so this idea that she might need to start from scratch to enter into Jesus' upside-down kingdom strikes her as the best news she could possibly imagine, because she has nothing to lose and everything to gain from a Messiah who's set to turn the world upside down. This is why someone like the Samaritan woman is so much closer to grasping what God is about. They already see the ugly underbelly of the system because they live at the bottom. So they're much more aware of how exploitation works, of how the rules of injustice prioritize one group and harm another group. They're the ones that get harmed. They're the ones under the gears, the ones being trod on. And that's why it's important for us to follow not the Nicodemuses, but the Samaritan women. To look to them and say, tell us how this sounds like good news. Tell us where you see the Messiah at work, because they're the ones who have eyes to see. They're the ones who are closer to this. I want to talk about what that looks like in our Beacon Bits this week and who those are that we might need to be listening to, centering, and following. Until then, grace and peace go with you.